So the history of Mormons in the Grants Pass area really began in January of 1916, when the Grants Pass Daily Courier told its readers that Bishop Nibley was coming to the valley to overlook prospects for sugar beet production. The front page of the Courier announced plans for a sugar beet factory to be built, and the local farmers were going to be growing hundreds of acres of sugar beets to supply this factory. Charles W. Nibley was presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at the time. He was responsible for the temporal welfare of the church's members and acting head of the UNI Sugar Company. And it was Bishop Nibley's sons, actually, that were directly involved with the factory in Grants Pass. So this huge two-story brick processing factory was built in 1916 on the south side of the Rogue River. A railroad bridge and rail spur were built to haul the processed sugar to the main railroad line on the north side of the river. The present Fruitdale Grange and the parking lot located at the intersection of Rogue River Highway and Parkdale Drive is where this was located. And so it sits on the north side of what was the enormous cement foundation of the sugar beet factory. And that stretched to the south. At the time, Fruitdale Drive was the main road out of Grants Pass to Medford in California. So the experienced workers that came to work at the factory were mainly from Utah, and many of them were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Soon they started holding services, and the first public mention of it was in February of 1917. So that year, the Grants Pass branch of the church was organized by Elder Melvin J. Ballard, with James Hood as branch president, and his wife Jemima was the president of the Relief Society. And Hood was the storekeeper for the sugar beet factory.
They built the sugar beet factory, but the irrigation system was not ready in time. The sugar beets did not get enough water, and after one season, that huge brick building, which sat where the Fruitdale Grange is now, was moved, torn down and moved to Toppenish, Washington. And that was the end of the first LDS branch in Grants Pass.
By the end of 1917, it was apparent that the sugar beet factory in the Rogue Valley was a failure, and this was due to lack of irrigation, unfortunately. So many church members left to work in other states at that time. So in time, Latter-day Saints began to kind of trickle into the area again, and the first one was Daisy Huerta, and that was in 1931 when she moved to Grants Pass. Membership increased and meeting places were found, and among the places used for church gatherings were the old Hull and Home Mortuary, which now is a private home on the corner of 4th and B, and the upstairs of French Laundry on Southwest J Street. So many old timers remember having to go upstairs at the French Laundry before meetings started early on Sunday morning to clean out the cigarette butts and the beer bottles that were left over from the groups using the building the day before. And imagine the delight, though, for these members after having to seek out little places to gather when in 1946 it was decided that a chapel of their own would be built on property bought from the Huerta family. And that was at the northeast corner of 4th and J Street. During the 1930s and 40s, there was a lot of fundraising going on. The members were responsible for coming up with the funds for this new building, and it wasn't until 1945 that they were able to actually begin construction. Now, we can't imagine, well, some of us can, those of us that were back there in the day, but the difficulties of building so soon after the end of World War II are really hard to imagine. The war effort had created shortages of almost everything, especially metal.
Well, like I said, when we moved here in 1948, we were still meeting above the French Laundry. We would have to go in Sunday morning early and sweep out the beer cans from the night before. Everybody did, the women, we were all there. We were sweeping up the floor and putting beer cans in bags to haul out because the room was rented out to various Elks, like the Elks Club, the Moose Club. They would rent that floor for one of their parties. So we always had to sweep up the cigarette butts and the beer cans, and then arrange all the chairs in proper order so it sort of looked like a chapel. And then over in each corner we would put a circle of chairs, because each corner of the room became a classroom. So that was a fun experience to be meeting in that building, knowing that just down the street the chapel was really coming along.
A member named Tom Morgan moved to Grants Pass about in 1942, and there were 3,540 members at the time. His dad was the building supervisor during construction, and he shared the following story about how some of the challenges that they faced were overcome. And at this time, there was a huge shortage on supplies, especially metal.
Tom Morgan had to go to Kansas City on business.
The building project was going to be out of nails in about 2 or 3 days. So he went to Sheffield Steel Corporation in Kansas City
and just asked them if there was any nails to be had, because here again he had phoned up and down the West Coast and there were no nails to be had because of the World War II shortage. And he went to the head man and said, "I'm representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a Mormon, and we live in Grants Pass, Oregon, and we're building a chapel." Well, the superintendent there got excited about Grants Pass. He said, "I was just there a few months ago, and it's a lovely town. It's a wonderful town. Tell me more about your town." Well, Tom finally got him back onto the story of, we're desperate, we need nails, and the lumber yards are telling us they're only receiving a quart of nails at a time, and we need a lot more than that. And after some more conversation, the fellow reached over, picked up the phone, and said, "I'm sending a fellow named Morgan over. Give him some nails. Give him all that he wants." 7 kegs of nails. And he had 4 of those kegs sent directly back to Grants Pass. And he was charged $7 a keg.
The price paid was $7 per keg, when they were going for, if found at all in Southern Oregon, for $21 to $25 per keg. So William Morgan later told his son that the building of the church was due to stop for lack of nails the very day that the 4 kegs arrived.
So that story was being circulated as the building was being built, of course. And here once again, we heard beautiful testimonies, how grateful we were that the Lord was really helping us build that building.
So another miraculous event that occurred was the I-beam story. An I-beam is a large steel beam.
Well, it became necessary to have an I-beam to put in between the chapel and the cultural hall. But because of World War II, there wasn't any I-beams. So we were praying about how to find an I-beam, and Tom Morgan said he would continue to pray about this, that surely the Lord would provide. We had the walls up, we were ready for that I-beam. They called all the lumber yards around from Portland and as far south as Klamath Falls. No I-beams were to be had. And a few weeks later, Tom Morgan and Joe went to the depot, the train depot that's now, well, it's still on G Street.
So While the branch president, Joe Jameson and William Morgan, were down at the local railroad depot on local business.
And as they parked their car and was walking towards the depot for another purpose, they noticed off in the grass a rusty old long I-beam. So they ran over it, measured it, it would fit. And they went inside the depot and they asked the station master, what is that I-beam doing over there? We've noticed an I-beam.
And so it's not hard to imagine the suppressed excitement of the two men as they approached him, and they were like, where did this come from?
And the fellow said, yes, that's been lying there for a couple of years now. We don't know where it came from. We don't know who ordered it, but if you can use it, you can have it. Well, of course, they were ecstatic and they knew exactly where it had come from. And so they made arrangements to haul it back over to 4th and J Street, and the I-beam was put in successfully. It came to within a 1/16 of an inch, being the exact size that we needed. So that was an exciting day, and everybody in the ward knew, well, it wasn't a ward yet, it was still a branch, but everyone knew that our prayers had been answered once again.
When the chapel was up and ready for plastering, it was discovered that the steel staples needed for holding the wire away from the building were unobtainable. Someone was inspired to see that bottle caps could be used for the staples. And so the bottle cap drive was on, and people were gathering bottle caps of every variety. Lots were gathered. And it's going to be interesting to see, and I know the old timers chuckle about this, that someday when the building at 4th and J is torn down, that imagine the surprise to find that the old Mormon chapel was completely covered with bottle caps labeled Olympia, Budweiser, Coca-Cola, 7-Up, and any other 40s soda pop at the time. So that's their little chuckle that they get out of that. The 4th and J chapel was built entirely with volunteer labor, and it took from 1946 to 1948 to finish. The saints began meeting in the chapel in the spring of 1948, but the formal dedication didn't take place till April 24th of 49. And by then, the local church membership had reached an approximate total of 250. So in 1966, that's 50 years ago, when it became obvious that the first Mormon chapel was too small for that growing congregation, property for a new building was purchased on Northeast Savage Street between 9th and 10th Streets. And this new building was planned to be at least 3 times larger.
That time, just Grants Pass ward. There was only one ward, one bishop, but the plans for this building, the Savage Street building, had been started, and they were going to start building it in a couple of years. So we helped with the money raising and the various sales and so forth to get the money put together. And by the early 60s, this building was being planned. The land was bought, and all the members, we worked very hard on building this building. The women like myself who had young children, we provided lunches. We couldn't really come and work on the building, but we did other things to be supportive. And the brethren and sisters worked very hard. We had work missionaries, which were in vogue at that time. They were sent out just like our proselyting missionaries are now, and they stayed, they served a full mission and worked on this building, along with a building supervisor who was brought in for that purpose. So then when the building was finished, then we abandoned the one on 4th and J. It was sold eventually, and then we have this one for several years with a maximum of 3 wards. First, second, and third wards were meeting in this building.
Loyal Harper was later called as the first bishop of the Grants Pass Third Ward, but he said this. He said, "I think of the many hands and the many hours of labor given by the members of the Grants Pass area, and how we worked together to erect a building to the Lord where we could meet in His name. They would look at the different walls and parts of the structure and say to themselves, I helped lay these blocks or bricks to build this wall. I helped shingle this roof. And although we were not professional in our workmanship, we had accomplished a goal together. After its dedication on October 13, 1966, the Savage Street Chapel became the center for Sunday worship for 3 wards with a combined membership of over 1,300. 40 years ago on Halloween, in 1976, the Grants Pass Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was organized. It was the 779th stake of the church, and it had about 2,000 members. Elder Howard W. Hunter was the one that presided at the stake conference, and he conducted the business necessary to create the stake. And in September of 1976, the church purchased the 7-acre piece property at the corner of Williams and Harbeck Road, and they announced plans to build a $1.5 million stake center. The local wards had help from church headquarters in paying for the building, but they still had to come up with a percentage of the funds. So there was a frenzy of money-making efforts. They had huge yard sales, they did bake sales, and one of the most ambitious projects held by the Grants Pass Stake were the stake anniversary dinners, where they charged $100 per plate. Today, in 2016, the Grants Pass Oregon Stake is presided over by President Scott Nelson and his counselors Robert Watts and Matthew Johnston. The stake includes 7 wards with names that reflect their geographical boundaries, including Beacon Hill, Riverside, Redwood, Murphy Creek, Merlin, Cave Junction, and 3 Rivers. With thanks and gratitude for all those early members who came before, approximately 3,600 current local members celebrate the first 100 years of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grants Pass, and acknowledge that in drawing strength from the past, this stake holds great promise for the future.